On the 26th of December 1900, the steamer Hesperus cut its way through the bitter cold of the North Atlantic. Its destination was a remote, storm-battered rock known as Eilean Mor, home to the Flannan Isles Lighthouse. But as they approached, a deep sense of unease settled over the crew. The lighthouse was dark. Its great lamp, a beacon of safety, was unlit, a dereliction of duty unheard of among the keepers. The ship's captain, James Harvey, ordered the horn to be sounded. The blast was swallowed by the wind. He fired a signal flare. It burned against the grey sky, but the lighthouse remained dark, silent. A volunteer was sent ashore. Relief keeper Joseph Moore rowed alone to the island's landing stage, a profound sense of dread growing with every pull of the oars. He found the main gate to the compound closed, but the door to the lighthouse tower itself was, strangely, unlocked. Inside, the silence was perfect. The kitchen clock was frozen in time. A meal of meat and potatoes sat on the table, untouched. A single set of oilskins, a keeper's only protection against the brutal Atlantic, was left hanging on its hook. But the three men meant to be manning this lonely outpost, Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur, had vanished without a trace. They had been swallowed by the silence. This is the story of how three men disappeared from a locked room in the middle of the ocean, leaving behind a series of bizarre clues and a logbook that points to a terror that came not from the sea, but from within. To understand the silence discovered on Eilean Mor, you must first understand the men whose voices were stolen by it. There were three of them, a trio bound by duty to the Northern Lighthouse Board. The principal keeper was Thomas Marshall, a seasoned veteran with over 2 decades of service, a man as steady and weathered as the island rock itself. He was joined by James Ducat, a husband and father of 4, a man with a gentle nature who, despite his experience, was new to this notoriously difficult post. The third was Donald MacArthur, a tough, hot-tempered seaman serving as the occasional keeper, a last-minute replacement for another man. MacArthur was known for his volatility, a man quick to a fight, now placed in one of the most psychologically taxing environments on Earth. Their home and their prison was Eilean Mor, Gaelic for the Big Isle, but the name was a lie. It was a jagged tooth of stone jutting from the brutal North Atlantic, 20 miles from the nearest inhabited land. For centuries, the island had a strange and feared reputation. Local shepherds refused to graze their sheep there and would never spend the night, whispering of a sinister, otherworldly presence, of spirits or little people who haunted the island's green slopes. It was a place the world had left alone, a place that seemed to resent the intrusion of the new lighthouse, a single defiant candle against an ancient darkness. Life inside the tower was a battle against 2 enemies, the relentless fury of the sea and the slow, creeping madness of isolation. The keeper's existence was governed by a rigid and monotonous routine. Their days were a cycle of trimming the lamp's wick, polishing the great brass reflectors until they shone like gold, and winding the massive clockwork mechanism that made the light turn. Every task was designed to keep their minds occupied, to hold back the psychological toll of being trapped in a stone tube, surrounded by the maddening, endless roar of the ocean. To combat this pressure, the Northern Lighthouse Board enforced one sacred, unbreakable rule: the rule of 3. The keepers worked in a rotation, ensuring one man was always resting, one was tending to chores, and one, at all times, was on duty in the lamp room at the very top of the tower. It was a fireable offense for 2 men to be on the landing platform at once. For all 3 to leave the tower together was simply unthinkable. The rule wasn't just for efficiency, it was a lifeline, a protocol designed to keep the light burning and the keepers sane. In early December of 1900, these 3 men began their lonely watch. They settled in for what should have been a routine 2-week shift, another cycle of polishing brass and marking the logbook, their minds on the families they hoped to see for Christmas. They were 3 men, bound by duty and isolated by the sea, beginning another lonely watch, completely unaware that the island had already begun its own. The first sign that something was wrong on Eilean Mor came not from the island itself, but from the sea. On the 15th of December, a passing steamer, the Arctur, noted in its log that the lighthouse's powerful beam was not operational. In the treacherous waters of the Outer Hebrides, a dark lighthouse was a death sentence for passing ships. A report was sent, but a message that should have sparked immediate alarm was, for reasons lost to history, not delivered to the Northern Lighthouse Board until days later. Meanwhile, the relief vessel, the Hesperus, was already fighting its own battle. Scheduled to relieve the keepers on the 20th of December, Captain James Harvey found himself trapped in port by a series of severe winter storms that churned the Atlantic into a fury. For days, he could do nothing but wait, his mind on the 3 men isolated on that rock, their supplies, and their state of mind. To a seaman like Harvey, the lighthouse keepers were more than just employees of the board. They were fellow soldiers in a constant war against the ocean, a brotherhood bound by the shared reality of the sea's unforgiving nature. A light going out wasn't just a technical failure, it felt like a personal one. By the time the weather finally broke on Boxing Day, the 26th of December, his mission had changed from a routine supply run into a deeply worrying investigation. As they cut through the waves, the unnatural stillness of the island became oppressive. The flagstaff was bare. No welcome flag had been raised. Worse, there was no sign of the provision boxes, which should have been prepared and waiting at the landing stage. Captain Harvey scanned the cliffs with his binoculars. There was no sign of life. He gave the order to sound the ship's horn. Its loud blast, a desperate question, sent across the water. The only answer was the cry of the gulls and the roar of the sea. He fired a signal flare, a burst of red against the slate-grey sky. Still nothing. A profound dread had now settled over the ship. Joseph Moore, a relief keeper who knew the island well, volunteered to go ashore alone. He was rowed to the western landing platform, a place he found in a state of strange disarray. An iron railway that ran up the cliff face was twisted and bent, and a supply box had been smashed open, its contents strewn across the rocks, clear evidence of a powerful storm. But as he climbed the steep cliffside path, the signs of chaos gave way to an even more unsettling sense of order. The gate to the compound was neatly closed, and the main door to the lighthouse tower was unlocked. With his heart pounding in his chest, he pushed it open and stepped inside. The air inside was cold and still. The silence was the first thing that struck him. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, dead air stillness that felt fundamentally wrong. In a place constantly battered by the elements, a place that should have been filled with the low hum of the lamp's machinery and the mundane sounds of life, this utter lack of sound was the first and most terrifying clue. The next was the coats. In the entrance hall, 2 sets of oilskins, those of Thomas Marshall and James Ducat, were missing from their hooks. But the 3rd set, belonging to the tough, hot-tempered Donald MacArthur, was still there. Moor's mind reeled. The oilskin wasn't just an overcoat. It was a keeper's armor against the North Atlantic. For a lifelong seaman to venture out into a brutal winter gale without, it was not just foolish. It was suicidal. It was a clue that made no sense. He proceeded to the keeper's living quarters, where the scene grew stranger still. An overturned chair lay beside the kitchen table, a silent testament to a moment of sudden panic or a hasty departure. In the hearth, the fire had long since died, the ashes cold to the touch. And on the table itself, a plate of cooked meat, potatoes, and pickles sat uneaten. The tower's main clock had stopped. Time itself had frozen in this place. The men were gone, but their final moments were eerily preserved. Searching for any explanation, Mor's eyes fell upon the Lighthouse logbook, the official record of life within these stone walls. These books were meant for dispassionate professional entries about weather and maintenance, not emotion. He opened it, and there, in the neat hand of Principal Keeper Thomas Marshall, he found the heart of the mystery. The entries for the days leading up to the disappearance told a story not of routine, but of a creeping psychological terror. December 12th, Marshall described severe winds the likes of which I have never seen before. He noted that James Ducat had become very quiet, and that Donald MacArthur, the strongest of them, had been crying. This detail alone was deeply unsettling. MacArthur was the hard man, the brawler. For him to be reduced to tears spoke of a terror beyond the physical threat of any storm. December 13th, the storm was still raging. The entry spoke of their immense distress. It was a great struggle to keep the light going. All three of us were praying. December 15th, the final entry. It was short, and the terror of the previous days seemed to have passed. It read simply, "Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all." After that, the logbook was blank. The words, meant to be reassuring, felt hollow and haunting. Was it a statement of renewed faith, or of resignation to a terrible and inescapable fate? But the strangest part, weather reports from the surrounding area showed there were no storms on those days. The sea was calm. So if it wasn't a storm from the outside that terrified these men, what was it? Back on the mainland, the strange tale of the Flannan Isles lighthouse spread like wildfire. The Northern Lighthouse Board was faced with an impossible task: to construct a rational explanation for a scene that defied logic. The clues left behind in the silent tower did not point to a single clear answer. Instead, they contradicted each other, weaving a web of terrifying possibilities. Over the weeks, months, and now, over a century that has followed, three main theories have emerged, each attempting to solve the puzzle of the vanished keepers. The first and official theory is one of brute force. It is the explanation of nature's overwhelming power. The superintendent who conducted the formal investigation, Robert Muirhead, concluded that the men were lost to a rogue wave. He pointed to the severe damage at the western landing, the smashed crate, and the twisted iron railway as clear evidence that the Atlantic had risen in a furious, unexpected swell. The likely scenario, he argued, was that during a lull in a storm, two of the keepers, likely Marshall and Ducat, had gone down the cliffside to secure the equipment. Suddenly, a colossal wave, far larger than the rest, crashed over the platform, sweeping both men into the sea. Seeing this from the tower, the third man, MacArthur, would have run out to help his comrades, and was himself caught by a second wave and dragged to his death. This theory explains the physical damage and provides a clean, if tragic, solution. But it is a solution riddled with holes. It requires the two senior keepers to break the board's most fundamental rule by leaving the lighthouse unmanned. It fails to explain why MacArthur, a man who knew the sea intimately, would run out into a monstrous gale without his oilskin coat. And most importantly, it completely ignores the phantom storm in the logbook, the documented terror that seemed to exist only in the minds of the men themselves. This leads to the second theory, that the monster on Eilean Mor was not from the sea, but from within. This theory focuses on the human element, on the intense psychological pressure of isolation and the volatile personality of Donald MacArthur. Perhaps the strange weather in the logbook was a metaphor for a storm brewing inside the tower. The theory suggests that a fight broke out, The overturned chair in the kitchen could be the last evidence of a violent struggle. Perhaps MacArthur, in a fit of rage, fought with one of the other keepers. The fight could have spilled outside onto the treacherous cliff edge, with the third man rushing to intervene. In the chaos, all three men lost their footing and fell to their deaths in the churning waves below. It's a compelling human drama, but it, too, lacks proof. The official investigation reported no signs of violence inside, and it feels improbable that three experienced men would all be lost in a single scuffle. With the logical explanations so full of doubt, it's no surprise that the public imagination turned to the paranormal. The old legends of the island, of spirits and strange beasts, were reborn. Perhaps a giant sea serpent had snatched the men from the landing. Perhaps the ghosts of the island, angered by the lighthouse, had finally claimed their victims. Some even proposed that the men were abducted by a foreign vessel, or in more modern times, by a UFO. These ideas, while fanciful, speak to the profound strangeness of the case. The official story feels incomplete, and the psychological theory is pure speculation. The event was so bizarre that for many, a supernatural explanation felt more satisfying than a flawed, logical one. Each theory attempts to shine a light on the darkness surrounding that final week, but each one casts its own long shadows of doubt, leaving the central mystery entirely intact. In the end, we are left where Joseph Moore began, standing in a profound and unnerving silence. The official explanation of a rogue wave accounts for the physical evidence of the storm, but it remains haunted by the human evidence left behind. The single abandoned oilskin, the breach of protocol, and the terrifying phantom storm described in the logbook. The clues contradict each other, leaving a puzzle with no solution, a story without its final page. Today, the light on Eilean Mor still shines, but no men walk its lonely halls. The tower is fully automated, its powerful beam a cold mechanical pulse against the darkness. It no longer needs a keeper's hand to function. It stands as a silent monument, not just to the memory of three lost men, but to the enduring power of a mystery that has refused to fade with time. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse still stands guard over the unforgiving sea, but it keeps its secrets. What do you think happened on that rock? Was it a freak of nature, a fit of human madness, or something else entirely? Let us know your theory in the comments below. The answers were lost to the sea, but their story endures. If you believe these forgotten histories deserve to be remembered, you can help us keep them alive by liking this video and subscribing to While History Sleeps for more deep dives into the dark corners of the past. Until next time, stay curious.